The Nightmen by Mark Van Dyke. Edward Varnish III looked out between the muntins of his third-story window. The streets beyond, seen through glass that had been slowly melting over some 200 years, like the glaciers between a frost giant's toes, appeared as wobbly and indistinct as a heat wave viewed through lenses made of honey. He watched the carriages and the horses, the ragamuffins, and the random and occasional pig. He drummed his work table with anxious fingers, as though he were practicing the harpsichord, an instrument about which he knew nothing. Edward Varnish III was a merchant, a man obsessed with profiteering and coinage, and though he aspired to mingle with nobles and artists and flaunt himself in mirrored halls with parquet floors and perfume in the air, he was, at heart, a lout. A timid knock came at his office door. "Come in," he said. His man Neville entered. Neville bowed and scraped as though he were dodging lashes aimed at his back by unseen demonic flails. He gave the merchant prince an obsequious smile and shut the door. "You called for me, sir." "Yes," sighed Edward. "Yes, I did." The imitation harpsichord was silenced as Edward picked up a dried husk of an old corn cob, completely bereft of seed. He waved the cob, dagger-like, through the air. "Do you know what this is, Neville?" Neville crossed the room, his nose a-twitching. The poor man had been completely stripped of his ability to read others. As a grovelling toad of a boy, he had been daily set upon by his mates and beaten for sport. His mother, out of a sense of familial duty, had pretended to love him, but if he had walked into the street and been trampled to death by mules, her tears would have been of the crocodilian variety. His father had lost no love for him either. Realizing early on that his son was a mollusk out of its shell, he had tried to murder him on 3 separate occasions, but Neville had proved surprisingly difficult to kill. After years of torment, he had grown adept at sniffing out threats to his well-being. As a result, his father had been forced to give him grudging respect, enough at least to stay his murderous hand. And though no one would say Neville flourished as a result, he had, at the very least, been allowed to cultivate and nurture the only talent the good Lord had bestowed upon him, smelling danger from a mile away. Neville had no sense of the motives of other people beyond hostility. The only thing he had ever come to expect from his fellow human beings was disdain and murderous intent, and yet if a pan were to be lobbed at his head, it would certainly miss. This uncanny ability to sense impending doom and extricate himself from its path made Neville indispensable as a dog's body to a merchant prince. He was Edward Varnish's rose upon the threshold of the vineyard. Neville inched closer to his master's hand and sniffed. "Is it a corn cob, sir?" "Yes," said Edward. "Yes, it is. Tell me, do you make anything of it beyond this?" Neville squinted, then frowned. "I don't like it." "No," said Edward, "I don't either. It was delivered to me this morning by courier. Can you imagine that, my dear boy? A messenger was dispatched all the way across Oard so that he might put this present wrapped in blue-tinted foil into my waiting hand. Curious, is it not?" Neville blanched as if he were about to be struck. Yes, sir, most curious." "Assemble the others." "The others, sir." "The triad, you imbecile. Fetch Morton and Fink." Neville scurried backward. "Of course, sir. Right away." Neville closed the door after himself. Edward Varnish nodded with satisfaction and went back to his wavy windows. He looked down on the street. The Bone Man was making his rounds. A pair of pigs was rooting through a pile of garbage. Neville appeared below. He turned to the west and hurried down Halton Street, disappearing into the crowd. Edward was proud of himself. He had hired Neville years ago, rescued him, really. After that, the man had proved to be insanely loyal. Edward puffed out his chest. It was good of him to help the less fortunate. He just couldn't help himself. He had a terribly soft spot in his heart for the little man. Chatterbox sat cross-legged on the stones next to the garderobe and gazed absent-mindedly down the cesspit. She propped her chin in her right hand and stroked the familiar hemp rope with the delicate fingers of her left hand. She could hear her mates in the darkness below, but she could not see them. They only had one lamp between them, and it had to remain above and dimmed. Men got blown to pieces and incinerated for attempting light in the holes, unless it was magical light, of course. But they had no magic light. They had no magic of any kind. Magic was pricey. They could barely afford oil for the one lamp they had, let alone glowstones or fizzy sparkles. And so Chatterbox sat on the edge of the pit in coffin-like darkness, waiting for Scamper's bird call. Chatterbox turned away from the hole as she heard Gob's uneven steps coming up the stairs. Gob's hips were displaced, and his legs were bowed inward so badly that his knees would have knocked together like wind clackers in a rainstorm had it not been for the padding of his woolen pants. Despite these glaring deformities, Gob was by far the strongest among them. He could carry shit from sundown until sunup and barely break a sweat. Chatterbox didn't know how many tons of feces Gob had carried in his lifetime. She shuddered to even think about it, but she admired him. She didn't like whiners, and in all her time as his partner she'd never once heard him grumble about his work. Sure, she'd seen him plant his feet and throw plates like a stubborn 2-year-old when he didn't get buttered bread with liver paste, his favorite, but she'd never seen him complain about his job. Fainter joked that Gob had been born from his mama's asshole, and this was why he was slow and loved to carry shit. Chatterbox wasn't sure, but it seemed like a plausible explanation. Gob stepped through the doorway, bucket in hand, mouth hanging typically open. "Hi-haw," he said. Chatterbox nodded. She knew what he meant. The cart was half full. Gob lurched and bobbed his way across the room, then sat down next to Chatterbox. She patted him on the leg. He sat and stared at the far wall. They did not speak. They didn't have to. They understood each other. Anyway, they were both cursed with similar afflictions. Gob had a tongue shaped like an Endorian sausage. He could barely utter a discernible word. Chatterbox was a mute. Scamper whistled. Chatterbox jumped to her feet and pulled on the rope. The pulley squeaked as she leaned into it. She strained against the weight of it. When she got the bucket within reach, she grabbed the handle, unfastened the clip, and swung the shit to the side. It was delicate work. The bucket weighed 50 pounds when full. If she misjudged the physics of it, she'd fall headlong into the bog. More than a few nightmen had met their end in this way, from one sort of hell into another, as it were. Gob took the bucket, but rather than carry it immediately away, as he did on normal nights, he turned it over on a burlap sack which he and Chatterbox had laid out on the floor. Chatterbox turned up the lamp and hurried over. They plunged their hands straight into the mound and spread the poop across the burlap bag like it was a giant open-faced sandwich. When the shit was stretched good and thin, they leaned in and studied it. "Aye," said Gob. Chatterbox nodded. "Anything?" called Fainter. "Oh," Gob replied. "All right, send down the next." Chatterbox helped Gob get the shit back into the bucket. Gob hoisted the pail, then started for the door. She fastened the second bucket to the rope, then lowered it back down the hole. The job went on like this for another half-hour. Chatterbox sitting alone in the dark, Gob carrying loads, Chatterbox lifting buckets, and both of them spreading shit on a blanket by lamplight. Then the first bracelet appeared. Then a gem-studded necklace. A ruby as big as a strawberry. 13 gold coins. A silver torque. With each new treasure they uncovered, Gob gasped, and Chatterbox punched the air. They grinned at each other like fools. They stuffed the jewelry into their trouser pockets and down their shirts. When they were satisfied that all the loot had been secured, they hastened back to work. Chatterbox had never seen Gob move so fast. As her friend raced down the stairs, she imagined that he was a human laxative, a full-grown prune pushing his load of excrement through the colon of the foyer and out of the manor house's anus. The morning sun shone warmly through Edward Varnish III's window, making a perfect shadow replica of itself on the wooden floor. He looked up from his book of poetry, a work by the renowned Nyandarian poet Sind Ful, and glanced at the enormous grandfather clock opposite his desk. It was 10:30. He returned to his poetry. Her flaxen hair teased live by wind, I knew she'd come ne'er again. The earth my love endeavors to deface, as it envelops her in its cold embrace. He stopped there and grumbled. Bah! Bunch of flowery garbage. Why can't these poets just say what they damn well mean? He closed the book, stood, and walked across the room to a full-length mirror. He was not entirely pleased with what he saw. He was a stout man, portly some would say, though not to his face. He wore a light blue vest over a long-sleeved white shirt. The vest mostly served to cover his girth. His black pants were clean and pressed. His feet, as usual, were bare. Edward Varnish despised shoes. Whenever he could, he went without them. The habit had developed during his days as a ship hand. When he was a young man, he was well known for his dexterity and his love of climbing masts and riggings barefoot. As a result of his agility, his shipmates had taken to calling him Chimp. He'd worn the moniker as proudly as a man wears a linen suit, but, like all things in life, it was not to last. Times changed, new opportunities arose. He took on different suits and different nicknames. After many years at sea, Edward began to command ships. He sailed from Amir to Othiron. He traded in ports from Indore all the way south to Kempt. His wealth increased, so too did his love of money. Eventually Edward left sailing behind. With the appearance of flying ships, he decided to settle in Oard. There he focused his attention solely on trade and local markets. As a member of a new and fledgling class of men, moneyed merchants without title, he felt compelled, like so many of his kind, to compensate for his lack of nobility and breeding. He developed a penchant for status and fancied himself a connoisseur of cuisine, wine, and ladies. He surrounded himself with fine clothes, lovely perfumes, great literature, and high art. But deep down, Chimp was always there, confused by poems and scratching his bottom at oil paintings. No amount of finery would ever hide it. No polished shoes would ever enslave the piggies of his soul yearning to breathe free. Edward Varnish III looked at his moustache, at the curls standing out from either side of his upper lip like bullhorns, and wondered if he shouldn't affix bells to them. It was all the rage these days, along with powdering your hair with ground cloves and nutmeg, a fad which, due to his investments in the spice trade, he had enthusiastically adopted. Since the fashion had begun, no one would ever catch Edward Varnish III leaving his house smelling like anything but a freshly baked pumpkin pie. A knock came at the door. Edward gave his moustache a twist, then turned. "Come in." Neville entered and held the door open for two men, Samuel Morton and Hieronymus Fink. The two guests strode in like twin hurricanes about to collide. The floorboards creaked and thudded with the weight of their bodies and the firmness of their boots. The walls cracked with the pressure of their mutual disgust for each other. Hieronymus was the taller of the two, thin with receding hair and a permanent scowl on both sides of his long nose. He went straight for Edward's desk, snatched the book of poetry up by its cover, waved it around, then tossed it back. "Still readin', I see." "At least I can." "Psh! Waste of fucking time." "Leave him alone," said Samuel. Samuel Morton was a fat man, with a thick black beard. He was winded from his climb up the staircase. He headed straight for a chair and sat. "He's a man of quality now, Finky," he went on. "Practically a duke or something, ain't that right? Did Lord Roland finally bequeath a title of high renown upon you?" "That's funny," said Edward. "You're a funny guy." "What can I say?" "I don't have time for this nonsense," said Fink. "Can we get down to business? My guess is we all know why we're here." He pulled a thin corn cob from his pants pocket. "This familiar to either of you?" Edward picked the cob off his desk and held it aloft. Aye, said Morton. Me too. He pulled a corn cob out of his breast pocket, then pretended to fillet it. Let me guess, he went on. Someone wants us to put these somewhere special. He pretended to insert the corn cob up his ass. As he did so, he gave Edward a wink. Right, said Edward. Something like that. He rolled his eyes, lamenting the uncouth nature of his associates. If that was it, I wouldn't be worried, said Fink. I know what you do in your free time, Morty. Samuel Morton laughed. But that ain't it, is it, Eddie? Said Fink. There's a bit more to it than that, isn't there? You wouldn't have called us here if there wasn't more. Edward did not like being called Eddie, but he did his best to shrug it off. Yes, he said. I fear it's some sort of message related to our mutual arrangement, Samuel Morton finished. Aye, our arrangement. More like a mutual derangement with you two, said Fink. The joke fell flat. Edward didn't understand it, and Samuel was more likely to hit people than laugh when they made fun of him. He balled up his fist. Watch it, you turkey-nosed twat! Yeah, said Hieronymus Fink. Tough guy. Anyway, this can't be good. No, said Samuel. It surely isn't. Someone knows. Samuel and Edward nodded. And I think I know who. Samuel looked surprised. You do? Yeah, said Edward. That's right. Well, so what of it then? Asked Samuel. Hieronymus took out the colored foil he'd received wrapped around his own corn cob. It looked just like Edward's. That's the stuff, said Samuel. Yeah, said Fink. So while you two jerked off this morning, I did a little nosing around. Get to it, said Morton. Well, it just so happens that there's only one manufacturer of this foil crap in all of Oard, Fink explained. And there's 3 separate shops that carry it. One of them shops been out of this color blue for 6 months. The other 2 sold rolls of it to several different ladies over the past few weeks. You know the type. The type that wraps corn cobs up in foil for their sweeties, said Samuel. That's right, said Fink. You fucking limp-dick cocksuck. Gentlemen, said Edward, can we please... As I was saying, Fink went on, no one suspicious bought any of it. So you've got nothing, said Samuel. So I went back to the first store, the one that was sold out. The proprietor said a lot of these noble houses buy this crinkly shit for presents and cards and whatnot. He said one house bought them out because the Lord liked the color, except turns out it wasn't no Lord at all. Was it your mom? Asked Samuel Morton, soliciting again, is she? Fuck you, you miserable boil of a... Again, said Edward. Can we stick to the damn point? Hieronymus Fink turned his back on Samuel Morton and went to the melted sugar candy windows. Turns out the man who bought it is a runner belonging to one Asa Frolic. Edward went behind his desk and sat. He crossed his legs and put his bare feet up. Shit, he said. Aye, said Fink. So we're really humped, said Morton. Royally, said Fink. Humped as a damn camel. Chatterbox bounced around the lamp like a moth. She couldn't sit still. Every time Gob came up the stairs, she bounded toward him, grabbed him by his paws, and did a dance. For his own part, Gob mostly turned in circles and let Chatter leap around him like he was a world pole in spring. He grinned and said, "Hey-ah!" But there was more work to do. Somehow, the buckets felt lighter. The shit went up and the shit went out until there was no more shit left to carry. Scamper made his bird call, then said, "Fader's coming up. Be easy. He snuffed it." Chatterbox knew what this meant. Fader was 58. He was an old man. He'd been breathing in methane and sulfur half his life. If he didn't faint by the end of a job, it was a miracle. He'd nearly died twice, but they'd always gotten him out in time. Chatterbox enlisted Gob's help. Together they pulled and pulled until Fainter appeared limp as a towel, clipped in just above the bucket. They got hold of him and hoisted him out. Gob spread him out like a picnic blanket. Chatterbox leaned down, felt beneath his nose. If a fish had sneezed, it would have been a stronger wind, but she felt his breath. He was alive. Gob went back to lower the rope down, but Scamper was already there, clinging to the loose stones of the pit just below the rim. The boy could climb like a spider. He got his foot over the edge and rolled out. He went over to Fainter. "Is he—" Chatterbox gave the thumbs-up sign. "That's good." Gob sat down and rested Fainter's head in his lap. He brought out a small vial of smelling salts and waved it under Fainter's nose. It took a moment. The old man groaned. "You're back, Grandpa," said Scamper. "You all right?" Gob helped the old man up. Fainter coughed. "Gods," he said, grabbing his head. "Well," said Scamper, "you won't have to worry about nights like this anymore, old man. Last job." Fainter looked at Chatterbox. "Do you have the—" Chatterbox leaned in and pulled out a necklace. She grinned. "That's the stuff," he said. "You did good, Chatter. You too, Gob." Gob gave the old man a hug. "Come on now," he said, with a cough. "Let's get moving. Remember, not a word till we're home. Yep." They all nodded. The four friends descended the stairs with their bucket and their rope and their burlap. Gob helped Fainter. Occasionally the old man would miss a step, and Gob would have to keep him from tumbling head first down the stairs. They reached the hall at the bottom of the stairs, turned right, then passed through a door. They entered the foyer and headed for the exit. No one came to see them off. The night men rarely met their employers. No one wanted to be around them. No one wanted to see or smell them. Payment was often made via courier. Chatterbox went out first, followed by Gob and Fainter. Scamper, usually the last one out, made sure the door was locked and secure. He joined the others in the alley. That's when the swords appeared. 10 men came out of the darkness and surrounded them. Their faces were grim. Their swords were, well, swords. What they looked like was of little consequence. "That's far enough, you rancid pisspot," said one. "What do you want?" asked Scamper. "Gods," said one, waving a hand in front of his face. "They smell like rat shit and death." "You're being detained," said the first. "Lefty here will collect your things." A man with a top hat stepped forward. He took the hat off and bowed. "I be Lefty," he said. "It's a pleasure to make your acquaintance, truly. I'll be assisting with the lightening of your load, so to speak. Any complaints as to service or lack thereof, as you see fit, may be directed to the town guard. Now, if you don't mind, you may deposit your valuables here in my hat." He jiggled the hat briefly. Chatterbox glared at the man and stuck out her jaw. Then she flipped him the bird. Now, said Lefty, "that don't seem fair. We've only just met." Gob frowned. "Oh, hack your health," he grunted. "What did he say?" "He told you to go fuck yourself," said Scamper. The men bristled. They lifted their swords. It was Fainter who intervened. "This won't do any good," he said. "Come on now, be sensible. Scamper, Gob, look at it logically. 10 swords to 0, eh? Come on, give it over now. Don't be stupid." The other 3 stared, crestfallen. But they knew he was right. What chance did they have against armed men? The best they could hope for was to overwhelm them with stench, but that would surely not be enough. Chatterbox pulled out her lute. As the necklace jingled in the hat, her shoulders slumped. Gob followed suit, looking confused and miserable. "Is that it, then?" asked Lefty. They nodded. Lefty motioned to the others. 4 men stepped forward. They clapped the night men in irons, then began patting them down. As one of them reached for Chatterbox, she pulled away and tried to run. They grabbed her. She bit and kicked. They wrestled her to the ground and put a knee in her back. "Sorry about that," said Lefty. "We trust you, of course, being thieves and all, but it's protocol, you understand." Chatterbox spit to the side. The man atop her gave her a swift smack to the back of her head. "Get him out of here." And that was that. The 4 friends were thrown into a windowless wagon and taken to a nearby holding cell. They were escorted down a strange flight of stairs, then locked in a solid stone room with 1 barred window. No one spoke. There was only the sound of someone snuffling. The boys realized it was Chatterbox crying. They said nothing. They knew she wouldn't want them to try and comfort her. And anyway, she was just giving voice to what they were all feeling. As they sat there in the dark, the morning sun rose in the east and shone timidly through their window. They sat and watched the sky turn pink. It had been their first robbery. Edward tossed his corncob back toward his desk. It hit the edge of the desk and fell to the floor. "But how?" he asked. "How'd that pasty-ass little shit find out it was us?" Morton shrugged. Fink turned from the window. "You know how these things go, Eddie. You've been in the game long enough. One rat's all it takes. Some skivvy got drunk, or we didn't pay him enough. Whatever it was, somebody talked, and now we're blown." "Fucking traitors," Morton spat. "I'll rip their bloody spines out." "Psh," said Fink. "Good luck with that." "We need to keep our minds on solutions," said Edward. "Getting all emotional isn't going to help us." "Shit," said Morton. "Remind me again, what's the punishment for price fixin'?" "On a scale as big as the corn market," said Fink. "Death. At least that's what's on the books. But you never know how these things will go. It is Oard, after all. Who knows what batshit judgment would get handed down? At the very least, we'll be finished." "Shit." Edward stroked his chin. The room grew silent enough that he could hear his grandfather clock ticking away the time. For several long seconds it seemed to him that each tick was a gear turning in his head. As the clock ticked, he thought and thought. He wasn't about to let some buttery fop like Asa Frolic get the better of him. But what could he do? He became distracted by his own feet propped up on the desk. He studied his toes, wiggled them, admired them. People underestimated the importance of toes. Every day thousands of people ambled hither and thither, complaining of aching feet or sore knees or shoes that were too tight. But no one really gave toes their due. It was a shame. Without a good solid array of toes, a man would topple over like a tree with no roots. Toes were lowly, sure, the lowliest really, but they had their use, and maybe even part of their charm was just how overlooked they were. Edward Varnish swung his legs over the desk and planted his tootsies on the hardwood floor. He curled up his little pigs and smiled. "Never mind you lads," he said. "I've got this." "Yeah?" said Morton. "What's on your mind?" asked Fink. "You're not the only one with things working," said Edward. "You underestimate me, Fink. You accused me of jerking off while you did work, but I can jerk off and do business at the same time, actually. Anyway, I've had a little project of my own cooking for a few weeks now. I think I see a way out of this little pickle we're in." "Care to fill us in?" said Fink. "No, not at the moment," said Edward, "but if you can wait a day, I think that'll be enough. Same time tomorrow?" "All right," said Fink. "I can wait a day." "And what about the Pipistrello?" asked Morton. "It hasn't unloaded our shipment from Dagam. Shouldn't we get it away from the docking tree before someone goes nosing around?" "I don't think so," said Edward. "That's just what Frolic will be looking for us to do. He wants us to get nervous, move around, and make a misstep. So we won't give him the pleasure. I say we sit tight for a few hours. No harm in that, right?" They shrugged in unison. "All right, then," said Edward, heading for the door. "You boys go on home. I'll let you know how things turn out." Fink and Morton glanced uncertainly at each other. "Don't fret," said Edward. "This won't take long." He practically skipped across the room. Fink and Morton watched as he made his way through the door, shoeless, and passed gaily into the hall. Fink turned to Morton. "So," he said, "our future rests on the shoulders of a chimp." "It sure looks that way. The chimp king of pumpkin fucking pie." 5 hours after the friends had been picked up, a man unlocked their cell door. 2 other men with swords and chainmail stood nearby. "Out," said one. Fainter rose and walked to the door. Scamper followed. Gob and Chatterbox were last to move. They shuffled into the hallway. There they saw another man. He was dressed in black and wore a barrister's pointy hat. He looked at them and covered his nose with his arm. "Good God," he said, his voice muffled. "What a stench!" "What could be lower than shit?" asked a soldier. "Nightmen," said the barrister. "Cursed sods. Well, anyway, you poor bastards, it isn't going to get any better for you. Let's all just dispense with the I'm innocent routine and get right to it, shall we? You're all guilty as hell, right?" No one answered. Chatterbox made a rude gesture. "Look," said the barrister, "I don't give a toss what happens to you four. I'm just here to get more information, all right? If you can tell me who put you up to this, maybe we can work something out. You get what I'm saying?" "Nobody hired us," said Scamper. "We act alone. We're the most wanted criminals in the city. We're the shit bandits." Fainter looked out of the corner of his eye at Scamper. He had no idea what the kid was trying to accomplish. "Right," said the barrister. "I get it. I mean, as far as I can tell, you are the most wanted shit diggers I've ever heard of. But come on, who put you up to this? This was a pretty delicate job. Someone on the inside had to be throwing those things down, eh? There were men on the inside, men on the outside. Who was it? Who hired you?" Gob belched. "Ari," he said. Chatterbox looked at her friend. Throughout the morning, Gob's face had been trying on various shades of green. He had started out looking like a mint tea. Now he looked like a split pea-filled diaper. She tilted her head. He saw her and forced a grin. "Henri," he said. She frowned, unconvinced. He didn't look hungry. He looked like he was about to barf up an unchewed squid. It was known to happen after a job. Some days it was all you could do to hold down a meal. "No one hired us," said Fainter. "We work alone." "All right," said the barrister. "Listen, let me explain this situation to you. You're probably looking at being shipped out to some hellhole like Dracnoth or some such. You'll probably work as slaves there in some mine until you die. Is that what you want?" Fainter knew there were laws against such things in Oard. Chaos Lord Roland abhorred slavery of any kind. Of course, this didn't mean the threat wasn't true, or that less than honorable men didn't profit in black markets. But the barrister? Why was he threatening them with such things? Was he crooked too? Something didn't add up. "We just want a name, that's all," said the barrister. Chatterbox turned around, went back to the cell, and sat down. Gob, being of little imagination, joined her. He rubbed his stomach. "Go fuck yourself," said Scamper. He turned and joined the others. The barrister turned to Fainter. "Look, Governor, you seem like a sensible fellow. I'm not out to bust your balls. You're in a tough spot, and I'm offering you a way out. You see that, right?" "You and I both know selling people into slavery is a pretty serious crime," said Fainter. "I think you're bluffing." The barrister glanced up at the ceiling. "Look around, friend. Does this look like a state prison facility to you? This is Oard. The prison system here is so messed up no one can tell the inmates from the wardens." Fainter glanced at the walls, at the armed men. "What do you mean?" "I mean you're way beyond the law here, friend. You committed a crime that angered powerful people, people who can hire swords, people who can have you flayed alive in some dungeon. Slavery in Dracnoth would be a blessing by comparison. And you, who the hell are you? You're a second-rate turd wrangler. Disposing of your lot would be regarded as a blessing to the environment. At the very least, no one would notice or give a damn toss. You get it?" Fainter had heard this sort of language before, but it still managed to hurt his feelings. He thought of his daughter and the sacrifices he'd made to ensure her better future, a future far away from him. "Yes," he said, "I get it." He glanced back at the others. They studied him. A silent but knowing communication passed between them. There was no doubt about what was in their hearts and minds. Fainter turned back to the barrister. "No thanks," he said. "We're fine." Chatterbox smiled faintly. Gob stared. Scamper grinned. "Fuck 'em," he whispered. "All right," said the barrister. "Have it your way." Fainter went back to the cell and sat down with the others. The door shut. The hallway emptied. After several long seconds, Gob grinned. "I have a egret." Scamper turned. "What did he say?" Chatterbox signed to them. "Oh," said Scamper, "he's got a secret?" Gob nodded. Fainter smiled. "Is it a good one?" Gob nodded again. "Did you want to tell us?" Gob shook his head. "Later." All right, buddy, you wait. Maybe it will cheer us up when we need it most. Gob grinned, then laid down. Sweat beaded on his forehead. He groaned softly as a moist fart ruffled the wool of his pants. Barrister Eamon Pratt rounded the corner. Edward Varnish's man, Neville, was waiting for him in the adjacent hall. "Did you hear all that?" "I did." "Was that enough for you?" Neville nodded. Yes, he said. "That'll do. They did very well." "All right," said Pratt. "Let me know how it all goes." Neville bowed and scraped his way out of the dungeons and up the stairs. He went out the back door. As soon as he set foot in the alley, he dodged to the side. A second later, a ceramic bowl, carelessly dropped from a window above him, shattered on the ground precisely where he had stood. The gods of fate were at it again, testing the limits of chaos and order, probability and chance. The universe echoed with the sound of the cosmic dice, but Neville never noticed. He hurried on through the alley and into the street. He crossed over and entered 34F. He climbed the stairs, then went to the kitchen where his master, the inestimable Edward Varnish III, waited for him. Edward rose from his chair. "How'd they do?" "Very well, sir. Admirably." "You think they'll work?" "They didn't utter a word," said Neville, momentarily ducking a bee that had bumbled its way through an open window. "Good. You know what to do. Get 'em ready." "Aye, sir." Neville arranged all the particulars. Edward Varnish despised details, so he gave many of the responsibilities of new projects to Neville. Neville was enchanted by Varnish's wealth and power and the trust he placed in him. Despite everything his parents and his school chums had thought and predicted, he had become someone. He was a man of influence, and he owed it all to Edward Varnish III. Fortune favored him again with the present predicament. He knew the nightmen and their business well. Varnish had secretly been running dozens of cleaners within Oard for years, though it was Neville who handled the day-to-day affairs. Neville, using the pseudonym R.P. Higginbottom, had, through his networks, quietly been gathering information on many of the nobles and wealthier merchants of Oard. One of these merchants was the dandy Asa Frolic, a well-known fusspot with girlish tendencies and an uncommon need for cleanliness. Frolic lived near the canals. His cesspit emptied directly into the Weldon Street Canal, but due to several years of drought, the water had not been high enough to carry waste away normally. As a result, shit had been quite colloquially piling up. Frolic, in order to keep down the number of nightly rat visitors and smells that constantly warred with his perfumes, powders, and oils, had responded by paying nightmen to clean his pit monthly. This was extremely abnormal behavior, but it was also the first wooden slat that Neville was able to slide free from the puzzle box drama that had been placed before him. The second tiny wooden piece to move aside was finding a team of nightmen just corrupt enough to be useful, while also being honorable enough to go down with the ship should things take a turn. This he had found. Edward Varnish III was a scheming, duplicitous bastard whose love of money knew no limits. In his constant attempt to fill the bottomless pit of his insatiable greed, he burned through people. He was always on the lookout for fresh talent. Of course, he had engineered the entire gambit with the nightmen. He had set up the heist. He had planted a man on the inside, and he had collected the treasure. Neville admired his master's talent for subterfuge, and was all too glad, as the loyal sycophant that he was, to play his part. He crossed the street back to several other buildings Varnish owned, went to the basement, rousted the guard, and commanded him to open the door to the nightmen's cell. He found them dozing on the ground. The room smelled like a latrine. "Hey," he said, rapping the door, "I need a word." The little mute girl, Chatterbox, lifted her head. The young man, Scamper, followed. He elbowed the older gentleman, humorously named Fainter. Fainter rose. The idiot oaf did not get up. He looked as though he were sick with fever. He sweated like a steam engine. He panted heavily and groaned, but did not rouse himself. "Listen," said Neville, "you remember me, eh?" Scamper frowned. "Yeah, you're that bastard who got us into this mess." "What do you want?" asked Fainter. "I've come to offer you a way out, a second chance, if you will. My master is pleased with your performance." Fainter frowned. That doesn't seem likely, given how much we screwed things up. Well, said Neville, Ah, said Fainter. I get it now. This was all a setup, wasn't it? It was your men all along. You got your loot, and you got to test us in the meantime. If things went wrong, you'd just find some cozy pile of shit to bury us in, yeah? No one's going to miss a few nightmen, right? Does that about sum it up? My master apologizes for the test, said Neville, but he had to be sure of your character. If there's one thing he values more than money, it's loyalty. You didn't rat him out, and that means you're all right in his book. Fuck his book, said Scamper. With all due respect, said Fainter, I think we're officially out of the burglary business. My master is offering you as much loot as you can carry if you take the job, said Neville. This time he isn't in it for the money. Get bent, said Scamper. No thanks, said Fainter. At this, the girl, Chatterbox, became animated and angry. She looked at the other two and began signing. She gestured with ferocity, pointing at Fainter and taking overly dramatic gasping breaths. She swung her fists, then crossed her arms over her chest. Neville had no idea what was going on or what the girl was saying, but when she was done, tears were streaming down her cheeks, and the old man was, well, beside himself. Well, said Neville, what was that all about? Fainter glanced once more at Chatterbox. She signed again. Neville thought he'd just caught the gesture for girl, or was it daughter? The old man turned back. He wiped his eyes with his shirt sleeve. All right, he said. What's the job? Neville smiled. I'm glad you've changed your mind. The job was simple. They'd done it hundreds of times. They just had to go to the address listed and empty the cesspit. The job was even easier than most because they didn't have to cart the shit up with a rope and pulley. They just had to open the gate above the canal and shovel the filth into the water. The payoff? If chaos ensued and they were somehow able to get into the house above, anything they could carry out was theirs. And chaos, Neville had assured them, was guaranteed. The four friends did their best to sleep in their cell. They had all agreed it made sense to simply stay put, but their nerves were up and sleeping was difficult. Gob tossed and groaned. Toward midday, he threw up in the corner. After that, he propped himself up against a wall and rocked back and forth as his innards growled like a chamber pot set to boil. Between rocking and repeating that he had a secret, he expelled farts so thick and noxious that they cast shadows on the floor. Chatterbox lay with her eyes shut, but she found it hard to sleep. Their first job had gone so badly she was nervous and scared. Scamper woke and sat in a corner. He chewed his bottom lip and tapped the air with his feet. Fainter slept fitfully, but he was more scared for his friends than he was for himself. He was old and worn out. It didn't really matter what happened to him. But Chatterbox was only 16. Scamper was only 20. No one knew how old Gob was, but unlike him, they all had healthy years ahead of them. Fainter had nothing. He had no family, no wife. His daughter was far away in Katamar. She would be better for never seeing him again, seeing what he had been reduced to. Despite Chatter's arguments to the contrary, Fainter knew he had very little to look forward to. If they could score, though, and he could get the rest of them out of the pits, he could die happily. The day passed in this way, everyone sleeping in small, anxious doses. The sun sank low. Even Gob had finally fallen asleep during the late afternoon, but his finely tuned sense of time alerted him it was shit o'clock, and he woke. He grinned. Egret! Fainter smiled faintly. I'm curious to hear all about it, he said, but I think we better get ready, my friend. Our employers will be here shortly. Chatterbox sat up. She went and sat by Gob. She signed to him, putting her hand on her belly. He nodded. Adder, he said. He patted her on the head with his massive hand. Scamper woke and stretched. I'm ready, he said. Let's do this. Half an hour later, 3 men entered with trays of food. They set the food down and left. The 4 friends ate. Shortly after that, Neville appeared. Ready? Fainter nodded. Scamper and Chatterbox jumped up. Gob rose. Neville motioned them to follow. They left the cell, went up a stairway, and emerged into the night air. Their horse and wagon was there. A slothy stood next to the wagon. He was a menacing 7-foot tall brute covered in light brown fur. His jaw stuck out in a perpetual scowl. His fangs were tremendous. His hands were enormous, with fingers like beef shanks. No doubt he was their guide. "Not taking any chances, eh?" said Fainter. Neville did not answer. He waited until they were all tucked safely within their wagon before he spoke. "Head straight there. You know what to do. No matter what happens, do not come back here." Fainter nodded. Neville ducked across the street and disappeared through the door at 34F. "Well," said Fainter, "here we go." He clicked his tongue and snapped the reins. The horse started out. The slothy lumbered along beside. He did not make conversation. Slothy rarely did. Chatterbox hunkered down in the wagon with Gob and Scamper. They watched in tense silence as Oard passed before their eyes. The cake shops, the brewery, the offices of the Crochet League. One window of the Crochet League was boarded up, undoubtedly the result of an attack by the Knitting Society. They passed by a tannery, a linen shop, and rows of apartments, until they came in time to the canals. The slothy guided them unerringly to Weldon Street. At 5:53 they stopped. The slothy nodded, then wandered off. Fainter looked back at his friends. "I know I don't have to tell you," he said, "but be careful, be sensible. I have no idea what we're in for, but a little money won't do us any good if we're dead, right?" Chatterbox nodded. Gob gave a positive grunt. "We'll be all right," said Scamper. "We just need to open the grate and stand aside," Fainter went on. "Don't lose your heads." They all nodded. They grabbed their shovels and headed up the steps to the residence of one Asa Frolic. Fainter knocked. A man in a red suit with black lapels answered the door. "Nightmen," said Fainter. The man blanched. It was clear he had tried not to, out of politeness, but the stink of the nightmen had overwhelmed him. "Come in," he said. They passed through the front door and into the foyer. They followed the butler through hallways covered by canvas tarps. They had a quick look around, trying to get the lay of the place, but none of them saw much of value. A vase here, a possible silver spoon there. The butler showed them the shitter with a hand over his nose. He handed Scamper the key to the grate. "I'll leave you to it," he mumbled. They waved him off. Chatterbox lit her oil lamp outside the room, then entered. Scamper followed. He went straight for the garderobe and removed the lid. He glanced at the others. He seemed about to say something, then shook it off. They knew what he was thinking. They were all uncertain as hell. No one knew what to do, or what was truly going to happen, though they all felt, without voicing it aloud, that the sun would rise in bloody streaks. Scamper grabbed the rope above the cesspit as Gob took the other end. Scamper gave a salute and a short whistle. Gob lowered him into the hole. The pit was not deep. Scamper descended about 15 feet, then set his boots in feces. The grate to the outside was beside him. He went to it and looked out. The water of the Weldon Canal passed gently below. He took out the key. Wan moonlight lit enough of the pit that he found the keyhole easily and unfastened the stout iron bar that held the grate in place. He wrestled with it momentarily, then pried it loose. Fainter pulled up the rope, then came down with the shovels. "Nothing?" he whispered. "Not yet." They both knew what to expect. Neville hadn't given them details, but they'd been in the business long enough. They'd heard stories from other nightmen. They'd heard of breaches, whether planned or surprised, and they'd gone to a few funerals. Fainter and Scamper started digging. There was nothing else to do besides the job, and so they dug and tossed excrement out the hole. It splattered and splashed into the canal, which was only a few feet below. Then a shovelful of shit hit the bow of an approaching boat. "Hey!" someone hissed. "Watch what you're doing!" Fainter and Scamper retreated quickly as a large dinghy pulled up just below them. There were 6 men inside the boat. They were dressed all in black with black masks. They carried daggers and swords. "Special delivery," said one. They threw a rope to Fainter. Fainter tied it to the grate. The men crawled out. "Good gods," said one, covering his nose. "What a fucking job. You do this every night." Fainter shrugged. Not exactly. The men laughed quietly, then headed for the rope. Your men up there. Aye. The first of the mercenaries tugged at the rope. Chatterbox and Gob saw it and got to work. They pulled the first cutthroat of the night up and out of the hole. He moved off to the side as they did the same for the second and the third. As they were pulling up the fourth, the butler reappeared. I was just checking on your progress, he said. Did you... His voice was cut off as a mercenary drove a dagger into his guts. He burbled blood, then gave a high-pitched gargling scream. Shut the fuck up, said the mercenary, stabbing him again. Chatterbox's face went pale with horror. Gob stood with his mouth gaping open. The mercenary stabbed the butler over and over. Blood poured out of his abdomen like wine from a punctured sheep's bladder. Before he fell to the ground, his shirt and pants looked like they had been dyed by Death's personal seamstress. Chatterbox lost her head. She bolted for the door, only to find that it was blocked by an armed guard of the house. She ran straight into him. Gob stared in confusion as the man struck Chatterbox across the face and threw her against the wall. Ada! He cried. Another man appeared in the hall outside the privy. He lunged at Gob. Gob jerked aside and pushed the man from behind. The man pitched forward into the mercenaries. A clash of swords and screams erupted from the privy. Chatterbox stood. She slapped Gob on the arm and pointed at the rooms inside the house. He seemed to know what she was talking about because he grabbed her hand and ran inside. They had no idea where they were going. They scrambled from room to room until they wound up in the kitchen. Chatterbox opened drawers. Gob threw open cabinet doors. Chatterbox snatched up silverware and shoved it down her pants. Gob found nothing. Another guard of the house entered the kitchen. You little shits, he spat. He started across the room, then gasped and fell to the ground with a sword in his left kidney. A mercenary stood there. He pulled the sword out of the man's back, then turned and headed for the stairs. Chatterbox glanced at Gob as men and women on the second floor screamed, some in terror, some in agony. Chatterbox grabbed Gob by the hand and pulled. She headed for the front door just as two men in black ran past her. One headed upstairs. The second went out the front door. He ran down the step into the street and was gone. She studied the quiet street. The way before them was completely clear. All they had to do was walk out. Chatterbox turned and went back to the kitchen. She picked up the dead man's sword, then motioned for Gob to follow her back to the cesspit. There was nothing but bodies in the privy. She motioned Gob toward the hole. Scamper appeared. He poked his head out and glanced around. Chatter? They ran to him. Gob took hold of the rope. No, boy, said Scamper. You can't do it. How would you get down? It has to be me. Come on. You two go down the rope. Come on, hurry. Scamper strained against the weight of his friends. Toward the end, he had to let go. Chatterbox and Gob fell into the muck. Scamper looked down. Sorry, are you all right? They're fine, called Fainter. Hurry, lad. Scamper clambered down the wall as fast as he could, then jumped. His hand landed on a fork and a spoon in a pile of shit. He left them and ran for the great hole. Chatterbox and Gob were already outside, crawling down the short rise and into the boat. Another fork dropped out of Chatterbox's pocket and sank into the canal. She dropped the sword. Fainter untied the rope, helped Scamper down the hill, then joined the rest of them in the dinghy. He pushed off and grabbed the oars. Gods of mercy, he muttered, don't abandon us now. For several seconds, all they could hear was their own ragged breathing and the creaking of the oarlocks. Then Chatterbox reached her hands into her pockets. She pulled them out. Empty. She gritted her teeth and clenched her eyes shut. Don't worry about that, said Fainter. There's no point. We have to get out of here. But where? Asked Scamper. Where do we go now? We're accomplices to murder. I don't know, said Fainter. Do we have any money? If we had coin, we could get away faster, safer. I got nothing. Chatterbox shook her head. Gob gritted his teeth. Egret, he said. They turned to him and watched as he unleashed a fart. The fart reverberated against the wooden bench below his ass. Egret, he repeated. That's your secret, said Scamper. You've been holding in a fart? Gob groaned again. He put his hands on both sides of the seat and lifted his ass up slightly. Scamper frowned. Is he... Gob farted a wet fart. Then he filled his pants. "Oh, man!" Scamper shook his head and laughed. "What the hell are you doing?" Gob smiled even as he put his hand down the back of his pants and rifled through his soiled undies. "Egret," he repeated. Scamper could not contain his laughter. Chatterbox chuckled. Even Fainter laughed. Somehow they needed it. "Gob, please," said Scamper. "What are you—" Gob kept fishing through the shit in his pants as Chatterbox cried with laughter. She held her belly and nearly rolled out of the boat. Then his eyes lit up. "Ah!" he grinned. "Egret!" He pulled his hand out of his pants and held aloft a singular turd nugget. He grinned proudly. "Egret!" The others leaned in and squinted. "That's a nice turd you got there," said Scamper. "No!" Gob wiped the turd on his shirt sleeve, then held it out again. As the shit rubbed off, a bright red gemstone appeared. A ruby, to be precise. A ruby as big as a strawberry. "Holy shit," said Scamper. "You swallowed it. That might just do it. Gob, you're a damn genius." They took turns hugging their friend. Then Fainter put his back into the oars. He rowed them all the way to the Bank Street Canal. There they climbed out. "Are we agreed?" said Fainter. "Docking tree?" They nodded. They didn't need to just get away. They needed to get as far from Oard as they possibly could. They felt sure that, thanks to Gob, the ruby would buy them passage on any flying ship Oard had to offer. They found a conductor willing to help them. He took their ruby and wrote them a ticket on the first freighter out of the city. They thanked him and hurried on their way. They rode the elevator to Docking Bay 23. Despite their stink, their ticket was acknowledged as good. They were allowed on board, though, despite the price they'd pay, they were relegated to the cargo hold. They didn't care. They were used to such treatment. Anyway, it didn't matter. They were free. The four friends huddled together like mice in the dark of the cargo hold. They smiled contentedly as the engines warmed up. The ship lurched as the cables were detached. Then the Pipistrello turned and launched itself into the night. The conductor had been warned. He knew what to do. He went to the first trustworthy courier he could find, handed him the package, and then returned to his work. The courier ran through the streets of Oard as fast as he could. Oard was a mess that night. It had altered itself twice. It took him nearly 2 hours to find 34F Halton Street. He knocked. A nervous man let him in. He was shown upstairs to a study where a man in a vest and bare feet sat at his desk reading poetry. The room smelled like a pumpkin pie. The man opened the package and smiled. "Well, there she is," he said. "My missing little darling has returned. I dare say this here concludes a hard day's work." He turned to the delivery boy. "I take it our friends are on their way to the mines?" "Aye," said the courier. "No doubt about it." "Well, then, that seals it." The barefoot man crossed the room and placed a few coins into the courier's hand. It was more than the courier had expected. He turned and left the kitchen. Edward Varnish III watched the boy go. He smiled, knowing he had made the lad's night with an extra silver coin. He just couldn't help himself. He had a terribly soft spot in his heart for the little man.